What is going on, alpha males? Welcome to the Alpha Male Podcast. The podcast where we talk about what it means to be an alpha male. We don't apologize for what we are. Strong, dominant, in control men, made in the image of God. Men, I'm going to plug in the bio. If you've heard it before, you want to skip it, you can skip around 3.5 minutes ahead from where it starts. You'll notice in the bio I talk about being a Marine Corps combat veteran, being in the Army, being a veteran of law enforcement. If you want to thank me for that service, one way you can do that without costing you any money is leave a review of this podcast. Rate it. If there's an easy way to scroll down and hit some stars and give it a rating, please do that. With that, I'm going to plug in the bio, and then we'll get into the topic. First and foremost, I am a servant of God, preacher, a fisher of men. God is number one in my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different, and I don't apologize for that. A little bit about me in the background. I grew up, I guess what you would consider a heathen. Didn't grow up a Christian, but I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider very poor. Hunting and fishing and shooting. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours in Iraq, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under M.A.G Viper. I also served in law enforcement for several years in LAPD. I worked patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, where by God's grace, He got me through some nasty places in this world of war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. Not because I am better, because God chose to have mercy on me and had a purpose for me, and I'm thankful for that. After my time in law enforcement, I was a private contractor for federal government, for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify, doing private contracting work. I'm very much involved in guns and gunfighting. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I should say my primary MOS is in both branches of the military or infantry, as of one sort or another. Specialized infantry in the Marine Corps and an MOS that no longer exists. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I won my first gold medal even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed by God with the talents He's given me to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. I've won most of my competitions in rifle and pistol, but I've also competed in archery and shotgun and even muzzleloader, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've competed in all that. I've also been a professional big game hunter and guide. Like I said, I grew up hunting and fishing and shooting. I've done it to put meat on the table because I like to put food on the table with the talents God's given me. I don't apologize for that. I've done it as a professional hunter and guide. I've slain all manner of beast and guided for all manner of beast. Bear and wolf and elk and deer, mule deer, whitetail deer. I've slain ram and fallow deer and countless animals. And I don't apologize for that either. FBI certified, firearms instructor, NRA, and a bunch of other 3-letter government agency certifications. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. I've been blessed to be the commander of a tactical team, an SRT, special response team, in a large metropolitan area, where our primary job was to stop active shooters. But again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God. With that, men, let's talk about militia. Militia. Let's start off by calling it what it is. I've seen a lot of stuff in the past, call it survivalism changing into prepping and all these other terms changing.
And I kind of take exception to that because I think we let things like culture and society creep in, and they let one very fringe group define an idea or a movement and then brand the whole thing as that. It's very Orwellian. Like doomsday preppers. Before preppers, they were called survivalists, and I still tout myself as a survivalist. I don't apologize for wanting to survive. So you saw people move away from survivalism to prepping, and then when that became kind of a fringe thing, they call it like sustainability or whatever. Stop letting other people push you around and push you out of using terms. This applies to militia. But it applies to more than just militia. Don't give in to the Orwellianism. Don't give in to the redefining of words. Don't apologize for using the term militia. Just because there might be some super radical neo-Nazi fascist group that calls themselves a militia, that should not ruin the word militia for you. If a bunch of neo-Nazi skinheads with, 3 teeth collectively get together and start a quilting group and call themselves the United Nazi Quilters of America, are all the other grandmas that Nick going to stop calling it quilting? Are they going to start calling it, equality blankets? I mean, get real. Stop being ridiculous and stop letting TV and culture and society take a very fringe group and try and make you feel ashamed for using a term. If that term is not malum in se, if it's not evil by itself, then don't give into it and stop using it and use something else. I've seen recently the switch away from the term militia to the term M.A.G, Mutual Assistance Group, because it doesn't have the negative connotations. But let something happen and let the media get a hold of that, and they'll make you feel bad for using that too. And then what are you going to tuck your tail between your legs and stop using the term M.A.G and use something else? Start calling it a coexist squad or some garbage. Stand up like a man and don't be ashamed to use terms because the TV or the culture or some political group wants to make you feel bad for being part of it. Stop doing that. Like the term assault rifle. Don't be ashamed to call your gun an assault rifle. Oh, it's a modern sporting rifle. And what happens when they make that a bad term? Going to start calling it a repeating target puncher? Like, give me a break. Stop being ashamed of it. Like, yeah, it's a weapon of war. You know why? Because militias have a lot of functions, but one of them is to fight war. To fight just wars is nothing to apologize for. Having a weapon that can fight a war as a man is nothing to apologize for. So stop apologizing for it. We start off the beginning of this podcast with, we're men. We're strong, dominant men, and we don't apologize for it. Just because I'm a strong, dominant man, that doesn't take away from a woman who's a good woman. It does make women look foolish when they try to do a man's job as well as a man, when a man can half-heartedly do it and do a better job because he's a man. In the beginning, he created them. Male and female, he created them. There is a distinction. Men and women are different. You think that's hate speech? You don't take that up with me. You take that up with God. Men and women are different. They're made different. They're both made beautiful. They're both made in the image of God. They are both valuable, but they are different. Stop trying to be something you're not, and stop apologizing for what you are. A man. Men are supposed to be strong. Stop wasting your time trying to be something you're not. I could waste my whole life trying to get pregnant. Guess what? I'm a man. I'm not going to get pregnant, and I shouldn't have to explain that to people. If you think that's hate speech and not just common sense, now you can use whatever term you want. If you think a better term better describes a group that you want to form or be a part of, then that's fine. But if you think a militia defines it well, don't let some be nice and civilized and say another group of people, don't let them shame you out of using that term. Imagine if the men that stood up in a ragtag militia in the middle to late 1700s against at the time, arguably the best standing army. If they'd have wasted their time arguing about the term militia and being ashamed to call themselves a militia, what if they'd have been steady apologizing for having the same or in some cases superior arms to the standing uniformed army of the time? If they'd have been busy redefining what they called their muskets instead of getting their crap together and fighting tyranny. Imagine if that would have been the caliber of men back then. They didn't apologize for calling themselves a militia. They didn't apologize for putting the word militia in the Constitution. A militia, a group of citizen warriors that stand up to do the right thing at the right time. I'm not aware of any of those men with their tri-corner hats apologizing for calling themselves a militia. So why would you today, because some political group tries to make you afraid to use the term, don't be afraid. Don't apologize for stuff you don't need to apologize for. Alright, with that out of the way, now that we're not afraid to use the term militia, because there might be some bad apples in a militia, or in a group of people that call themselves a militia, let's try and define what a militia is. So, let's go to the Oxford Dictionary, because that's the first one that pulled up when I Googled it. A military force that is raised from the civilian population to supplement a regular army in an emergency. Well, let's go to Merriam-Webster. See what old Merriam-Webster has to say. A part of the organized armed forces of a country labeled to call on only an emergency. Another part, a body of citizens organized for military service. Second definition, the whole body of able-bodied male citizens declared by law as being subject to call to military service. Let's look at the third definition. A private group of armed individuals that operates as a paramilitary force and is typically motivated by a political or religious ideology. Interesting side note, my name, Michael Milito, M-I-L-I-T-O, is the Latin root word from which we derive the term militia and the term military. It is Latin for soldier. And a blessed name for me to have, as you can tell from my bio. Fitting. Well, that's what Webster had to say. That's what Oxford had to say. How would I define a militia? I'd say it's a group of citizens that take it upon themselves to be trained and equipped and willing to perform military and or law enforcement duties. Again, don't be ashamed of that term. Don't fall victim to some kind of new speak. I doubt even the most left of factions and political groups would say the founding fathers were evil for being in a militia. I don't think they would make that case. I've never heard anybody make the case that the Texas Rangers were evil, even though I would consider that a militia. Maybe not today because they're funded by the government, but initially. Or what about what we would think of today as the posses in the West when it was being settled? And they were just territories and there was no real government to speak of. Would they not be militias? What about the brave men that stood up for the nation of Texas to defend the Alamo? They were militia, friends, and they weren't evil. And I think you kind of do those men a disservice if you're ashamed to use the term. A quick shout out to the patrons and a group you can be a part of if you join Patreon. They recommended a book that I just read, Empire of the Summer Moon, talking about the Comanches and our fight against the Comanches. It's a very good book, a very good read. I would recommend it. It made me think about the Texas Rangers, the early Texas Rangers in this. And those are just ones off the top of my head. Certainly we could think of many more great and good examples of militia. What about the French resistance that stood up to the Nazis as just civilian militia? Anyway, transitioning to the next part of this podcast, we talked about not being ashamed to use the term, what a militia is. We talked about some good militias in the past. Let's talk about, are militias still relevant in 2022? In a world of drones and thermals and nods, in a world of intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons, are militias still even relevant? Well, let's be circumspect as men. Let's take a step back. Let's use the critical thinking that God gave us. Let's look at it objectively. Let's look at it together. Let's be circumspect and reason together, men. So let's do that. Now, we talked about the Revolutionary War. We touched on it. Now, even back in the Revolutionary War, the American man, the American alpha male, a pioneersman, a frontiersman, it was an honorable and good thing for an American man to be well-armed, well-regulated, meaning being well-trained and efficient with firearms. That's one of the great advantages we had. And that came from the rugged frontiersmen of America. At that time, the frontier was like Pennsylvania, Kentucky, maybe Ohio, the Ohio River Valley. But they hacked their lives out of the wilderness. They were skilled with a firearm before the war, before the revolution. There were many, many skilled civilian gun owners in America, when the British soldier may have been the best standing army at the time, but they did it for a paycheck. The American militiaman did it because it was his way of life. It was part of who he was as a man. And we're talking about, is it still relevant? Well, at the time, the British had great warships. I'd argue, the ICBMs of the day, they traveled the world in giant weapons of war, conquering all manners of people. It was said for a time the sun never set on the British Empire. They conquered all manners of people and people groups. But the American Minutemen, the militia, said no, not us, not anymore. And though the British had superior mass weapons, great gunships and war galleys, the rugged individual American man with a rifle stood up and won. Despite the odds, despite the better technology and the weapons of mass destruction of the day that the British possessed. How many examples do we see of this throughout history? I'm not going to go through all of them. I've thought of just a few right now thinking about it that I didn't think of beforehand. To keep this podcast a reasonable length and to keep it somewhat topical, I said, is it still relevant today? Well, we are almost unarguably, I'm talking America, the greatest military the world has ever seen. Technologically, monetarily, we have aircraft carriers. We have a navy, a blue water navy, kind of shames any other navy. We have enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world, pretty much every major city several times over from what I understand. We have soldiers and Marines equipped with night vision. But guess what? We just pulled out of Afghanistan. We just got defeated in Afghanistan, like the Russians before us. Now, I do not condone the Afghan ideology. I do not condone the Taliban or any ideology like that. I think it's abhorrent and disgusting, and they need to be wiped off the face of the earth. That ideology, that way of life, is wrong. And again, I don't apologize for saying that. But that doesn't change the fact that a ragtag militia of men with AKs that are at this point, 60, 70-year-old technology, made the mightiest war machine, military-industrial complex the world has ever seen, the U.S., tuck its tail between its legs and run away. So is militia still relevant in 2022? I'd say we just had a good example within a year that, yeah, it's very relevant. If the U.S. military, in 20 years, I started fighting that war. I started fighting the global war on terrorism when I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I was there for the invasion of Iraq. The war in Afghanistan started a little bit before that. Some 20 years. And we couldn't beat a ragtag militia of men with rifles. So is the militia still relevant? Still a reason for a militia? Can a militia still be effective in 2022? Because if the answer is no, then it's kind of a moot point. Why are we talking about it? This is not a history podcast. This is the Alpha Male podcast. Is it still relevant for alpha males? Is it still a thing that's effective? I'd say unarguably yes. Militias can still be, and very clearly are, still effective. So if you, as a man, want to be in a militia or be part of a militia or form a militia, then don't apologize for it. Call it a knitting circle. Call it an equality squad. Call it a Barbie unicorn rainbow gathering. Call it a frickin' militia. Again, like the brave Minutemen, whose actions were part of the history of this nation. Like the men who stood up and defended the Alamo when the government was nowhere to be found. Imagine. For whatever reason, pick your apocalypse. An EMP has hit. A solar flare has hit. The economy has completely collapsed. You can't call 911 because nobody is coming. You can't call 911 because phones don't even work anymore. They're a thing of the past. And it happened very quickly. You live in the suburbs outside the city, and you've had wave after wave of refugee pass by where you are, talking about a band, a horde of raiders that's going house to house, looting and plundering and taking unjustly, taking advantage of weaker women and children, the defenseless. You grab, like the men that defended the Alamo, you grab the rifle that you have, that you train with, a weapon of war, an assault rifle, to assault an evil force. Grab your sidearm, you grab some basic supplies, and you see some other men on your street doing the same to defend your community from what's coming. A militia. With that, men, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Alpha Male Podcast. If you want to be part of this tribe, a little bit deeper, a little bit more in depth, like-minded men like yourself, please consider supporting on Patreon. Get there via goodshepherdtraining.com or just click the Patreon link that'll be in the show notes. For group chat on there, we talk about all manner of things. In fact, today's tactical tip is going to come from a chat that I had this morning. It was something that until they mentioned it, I forgot that I even knew that I knew. I talk about my bio as a police officer. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. One of those was part of police training and having access to the police armory with all manner of weapons. One of the tricks I learned from an old salty, I shouldn't call him old, but a salty police officer who had been around longer than I had. Guns that you have that are just really nasty, it's rust or really hardcore corrosion. One of the things that I learned from him was having like a Tupperware container or something similar, and just soaking that firearm or that firearm part in simple green for maybe as long as days to break that rust, that carbon, those things up. Simple green. Another thing I learned in the military, one of the recommended, I believe, even recommended in manuals, things to clean a firearm, an AR-15, a weapon of war, an assault rifle. One of the things is hot soapy water. Get yourself some Dawn dish soap, old, not your current toothbrush, but an old toothbrush, hot soapy water, and scrub the crap out of it, and just make sure you let it dry before you reassemble it. But good, cheap, easy, and very effective way to get your guns super clean. Basically, once they're clean, throw some CLP or whatever your favorite flavor of gun lubricant is. On that note, a tactical recommendation, Ballistol. Ballistol is a great gun cleaner, gun lubricant, emulsifier. can mix it with water, making something referred to sometimes as moose milk for cleaning corrosive things, corrosive salts, corrosive ammo. It's also good for a lot of other stuff like cleaning wounds. There's a lot of good gun lubricants out there, but how many of those are recommended for wound care? Ballistol, been around I think since the Imperial Army of World War I. It's good on not only gun metals, but wood and leather. I think it smells fantastic. If you like the smell of black licorice, you'll likely like this. And again, also good for wound care. So if you're like me and you like to live minimally, I mean, I have a very abundant life, but I live in 150 square feet with my wife and our Rhodesian Ridgeback. A multifunctional thing: gun cleaner, gun lubricant, wound cleaner, ballistol. With that, man, we'll start transitioning to the next part of this. If you like this episode and you think we should do a series on militia, I'd appreciate a comment or something like that to let me know. Let the community know. I do this podcast for you guys, so let me know what you want and what you like and what you want more of. That's going to bring us to the tactical verse of the day. Therefore, understand today that the Lord your God is he who goes over before you as a consuming fire. He will destroy them and bring them down before you. So you shall drive them out and destroy them quickly. And we talked about militia today, and we spent some time going over why the word militia is not malum in se. It's not evil by nature. Don't give in to newspeak and let other people define a word as bad to make you afraid to use it. They're also not just good by nature. There are bad militias. There are, I dare say, evil militias. I don't apologize for being a man, for being a warrior. I would only caution you that you should always fight for the right reasons, on the right side. Right and wrong is defined by God. It doesn't change. What's sin and what is good is constant, and it doesn't change at a ballot box. There are many different kinds of men and many different kinds of alpha males. Whatever kind of man you are, be a good one. Be a just one. You are made in the image of God. Let us strive to represent him well. Thanks for listening, men, and have a blessed day.